Good evening, Intro to Web Development students. My name is Dan Frainer. I am going to be your instructor tonight. I am the program lead of the part-time after hours program here at Lambda School, and I'm really excited to join you in your introduction to web development tonight. Before we get started, I'd love to talk to you a little bit about Lambda School and our de-risked education model. We know that there are a lot of options out there in the world, especially when it comes to software engineering schools or boot camps. And we are very fortunate to be able to offer our program for $0 up front and $0 until you get a job in the software world, until you get a job making $50,000 a year. Or there are other schools or between $10,000 and $20,000. We have partnered with some great people and are able to offer ours essentially for free until you get a job. So it really incentivizes us to get you the best education you possibly can to go out and get a job. Because if you don't get a job in the field, then we gain nothing from it either. So it's an awesome symbiotic relationship between the student and the school, and it's a really awesome, unique way of doing things where we're going to try our hardest and really offer you the education that you need. You come in here and you work your hardest, and we're doing this together as one, and it's a really great opportunity for all of us. So that's really, I love the fact that we are able to de-risk this education and this model that we use, because not only is it making our students a little more at ease rather than dropping $20,000 before they even know what they're getting, but it also allows us to be able to teach and provide an education for everyone, regardless of geographical or financial barriers they have. So a lot of underserved communities and underserved individuals that might not have an opportunity otherwise. So if you're interested in applying to Lambda School, please do so. As soon as you finish your first assignment with this Intro to Web Dev course, you're eligible to apply. And we're standing by waiting for your application, and Karen will reach out to you and get you set up for an interview. Yeah, that's Lambda School, and that's our model of de-risk education. Let's get into our lesson tonight. So we have been talking about JavaScript for the last couple of nights, and last thing we went over were functions. I kind of want to take a step back for a minute and keep talking about data types. And we're actually going to talk about a concept in software engineering tonight called data structures. So let me share my screen and we'll get right into it. All right, so on our first night of JavaScript, we learned about the three basic data types, or our primitive data types. All right, we had strings, we had booleans, and we had numbers. These are our basic data types, and they really make up a lot of the majority of the data we use when we're programming. Right, we have our strings, booleans, numbers, a couple other ones, but these are our most basic types, right? So a string, of course, we know, just to review, is anything in between quotes. And that's a string, essentially. It can be numbers, right? It can be punctuation. It could be anything else. Anything in between quotes is a string. Most of the time we see letters. A Boolean is either true or false, right? And a number is a number. And a number could be an integer. It could be what we refer to as a float. It can be negative, etc. these are our basic data types. And when you were first working with these basic data types, you may have come across this thing that we are not allowed to use more than one when we're assigning it to a variable, right? So we have our variable string str here, and we've assigned it to my name, Dan. But what if I also wanted to put my last name in there? Or what if I wanted to put someone else's name in there? I'll put Thomas's name in here. This is going to throw an error. We get an unexpected token. We can't point a variable to more than one of these primitive data types. And so what we're going to do is we're going to introduce the concept of collections. And we can point a variable to one collection that contains a lot of these data types. The first one we're going to talk about today is an array. So an array is, we're just going to write our variable like normal. An array is a data structure. And so a data structure allows us to hold a collection of data type, of individual pieces of data. And it's a collection, so we can hold as many as we want. An array is signified by an open and closing square bracket. Okay, so this is our cage, our box that we're going to put all of our data into. All right, and what we can do in here is we can just write the data we want. Now, an array, for those of you that might have previous programming experience, in JavaScript, we don't have to define what data type goes in the array. In JavaScript, we don't have to define the size of the array. The only thing we need to define an array is the open and closing square bracket. All right? And in an array, we can put as many pieces of data as we want, etc. And this allows us to hold data, more than one piece of a primitive data type. Okay, it's a storage container for our data. One thing to know about arrays is that they don't need to be the same type. You don't have to have the same type in JavaScript. We can have numbers in here. We can have Booleans in here. And this is a valid array. Okay. So the types of data coming in don't need to be the same, although generally speaking, they are going to be the same. It's very difficult to work with an array if you have mixed data types in there, but it's not a requirement, right? So they don't need to be the same. And while it's mostly true that the pieces of data will be related, they don't need to be related, right? So let's say we're going to do this as students. So we want to hold all of the students in one class in an array, and we want to be able to pass this variable simply. We can just give it an array and add all the names of the students in the array. Great. So now that we have an array, we can console log it. And we'll see it shows up as the 4 strings within our array. Now, this is just where arrays get started. And we can now pass this student's array along wherever we want it to keep reference to these students, right? But arrays have a ton of really cool built-in features to them. First and foremost, it has a property on it called length. So if I say students.length, remember a property is going to be used, well, if you haven't used properties yet, a property is a dot and the name of the property. So length is a property that's on every single array, And so I can say students, which is the name of the array, dot length, and it'll give us how many pieces of data are in there. 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And if I add another student, we get 5. Okay, you've used the length property with strings before. You know, you can use a length property with a string, and it'll tell you the amount of characters. Let's do this. It'll give you the amount of characters in the string, and just like the amount of characters in the string, the length property on an array will give you the number of different pieces of data within the array. And you can essentially understand that every different piece of data is separated by a comma. One thing I forgot to mention, if you want to add pieces of data into your array, they have to be comma separated. So if I don't have that comma in there, I'm going to get an error, right? Because that's 2 different strings taking the place of where one should be. So we're going to do a comma. So imagine each is just like bringing a string in like that. Okay, so they're comma separated. That's important to know. All right. If you're getting an error, you might want to look and see if you have missed a comma. And this actually might, yeah, that's fine. Okay. So the length property is going to give us the number of pieces of data in the array. All right. So now that we have the ability to build an array, and we have the ability to add as many pieces of data we want to an array, and we know how to get the length of an array, now we're going to start being able to use our array. Okay. And remove Raj for a moment just to make it a little more clear. When we want to access items in an array, right, we can look at the array as a whole, and we get the entire array. But what if we want to access specific items in the array? What if we want to grab Sarah, etc., or Thomas, or Jen, right? We want to be able to access them as a single object or single item. Well, arrays have a numerical position within themselves. So every item in here is in order, right? We can see that they're in order. And that's a really cool thing about arrays, is that they keep the order. It's guaranteed. The order that you put these items in an array is always guaranteed to be in that exact spot. Okay, and each of these items has their own numerical position, we call an index. And the index, and this is going to be tricky for those of you with no programming knowledge so far, this is kind of one of the trickier parts about programming. The index is always going to start at 0. Okay, so the first item in the array is always going to have the index of 0. The second item, 1. Third item, 2. Fourth, 3, and so on. Okay, so this is what these items correspond to, their index, their numerical position. Like I said, it always starts at 0. So the first item is always going to be 0. And the last item, and we'll go over this in a little bit more in depth later, the last item is always going to be 1 less than the total amount in the array, right? So there's 4 items in the array, and the last item is always going to be 1 less than that total amount. I want to reiterate this 0-based index thing because it's where a lot of students run into a lot of issues. So I want to make sure that everyone understands this, and you'll get tripped up by it. Everyone does. All right. So now that we know that these individual items have their own indexes, now we can use that index to grab that item. So let's go students. So we typed the name of the array. This is how we use the index, the name of the array, and then we type those 2 same square brackets. And within that square bracket, we give the item in the array that we want. So let's use 0. Let's do the first one in the array first off. And it's going to be Dan. And we should get just Dan back. There we go. And I'm going to get rid of that undefined thing. I'm just going to call it. And we should get Dan. Awesome. And we can do that to any of the items in the array. All right, 2, 3, and let's go 4. I want everyone to think like, what is going to happen if I give an index of an item that's not there? Just think for a moment to yourself, and then we'll see it. We're going to get undefined. It means there's nothing there, right? Nothing is in the array at the 4th position, at the 4th index. But 3 is Sarah. 2, 1, 0. Cool. Now we are able to access the items in our array. So we know that the first item is always going to be 0, right? And if you will remember what I just said, is the last item is always going to be the amount of items in the array minus 1. Okay, it's always going to be 1 less than the items in the array. And let's say that we want to get the last item, but we don't know how many items are in the array. Right? We want to grab that last item, but we don't know if there's 3 or there's 20. You know, I can say 3, and I can keep going up until I get undefined. But there's a surefire way to grab every single, or to grab the last item in any array, no matter how many items it has in it. Think for a moment how you would do that. So we went over a property on an array earlier called length. And remember that length gives us the amount of items in the array, right? Length is always going to return the amount of items in the array. So if I said students.length right now, it's going to give us, should give us 4. We got 4 from it. Remember what I just said is that the last item in the array, their index is always going to be the amount of items minus 1. So what if I said length minus 1? Right? So this is going to be 4, and it's going to be 4 minus 1. And we're going to get 3. And what's the index of the last item in this array? It's 3. Let's do this. Let's add another one. Let's add Raj back on there. And now let's see what it comes up with. There's 5 items in the array, and Raj's index is 4. And it automatically, dynamically sets us up to get the last item in the array. So we can do something like this. If I spell const right. So I can set the last index to students.length minus 1. And then I can use last index. Right? So let's go over this. We'll look and see that it's right, Raj. And let's go over what's going on here. First, we have our array, right? We have 5 names of students in this array. Each of these students, each of these items in the array are given an index. They're in order. They're always going to be in order. And the index for the first item is going to be 0. The second item is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, etc. until we get to the last, right? So they're always going to have their own index. We know that the first item is always 0, and the last item is always going to be the amount of items in the array minus 1, right? Okay, let's keep that in mind. Now we're going to use the dot length property on the array itself. We'll get all the items in the array. That's 5. And then we'll subtract 1 from it. That's 4. And we are going to point the last index variable to 4. Okay, so now it's going to be 4. It's actually going to be whatever this comes up to. We might not even not know what students is, right? We might not, it might be coming from somewhere else, and we don't know how many items are in it. We just know we want the last item. So if we can designate the last index to equal whatever comes back from this formula here, then we can use the assignment, or the the access property by using the brackets, and we can just ask for the last index. We'll get Raj, and I mean, we can just do this too. 4, same thing. But, you know, say I delete all these. Now Thomas is the last one on there. 2 minus 1 is 1. We see that Thomas's index is 1, and that's going to be assigned to last index, and that's what we're going to use to grab the item. And there we go. And you can see we can do this with as many or as little items as we want. Really cool trick of grabbing the last item in the array. All right. I want to let that sit for a moment, and then we're going to move on to assignments in arrays. Okay, now that we know how to access all of our items in the arrays, now we can actually go in and change these items whenever we want, right? So let's go. So we have the array students, and this would be, oh, I'll just do this. We can access an individual item in an array using our square brackets. And we can also change an item in the array using our square brackets. So let's do this real quick. So log students, right? And then we'll go console log students. So think if this was not a const, but a let. And how would you reassign string if this was a let? Well, you'd probably do string equals new name, something like this, right? And that's going to reassign what string it, what the str variable is, excuse me, to new name. And we can see do it before and an after. We have before str is equal to Dan, after str is equal to new name. So we have reassigned this str variable here. We can do the same exact thing with our brackets in an array. So let's say that Dan got kicked out of the class and we have a new student in the class. We have Mike. Right? So all we're doing is taking that array at that index and reassigning it, right? A single equals is an assignment operator. Always, always, always an assignment operator. So that means we're assigning whatever is in this at the 0 index in students to Mike. And now we can see that the first one came through, and then the second one, and we have reassigned 0 to Mike. And we can do that to any of them, right? 3. All right, and there's Mike now. Okay, so we can go through using these square brackets like this, and we can reassign whatever we want to it. Even if it's a const, and that's a little more advanced topic because we're not changing students, we're changing what's inside of students, so we can do it even if it's a const. And we can reassign items in there, right? Anywhere we want. And we can do this too. Dot length minus 1, right? Think of what this is what this will look like. Think of what the array will look like if I do students.length minus 1 reassigned to Mike. Give you a second. Yeah, just reassign the last item, right? We know that that the dot length minus 1 is always going to be the last item, no matter what. Right? No matter what, it's always going to be the last item. It's a really cool feature to be able to just go in and don't even know how many items are in there. And we're able to use that dot length minus 1. So that's assignment. That's how you assign or change the assignment of an index in an array. All right. All right. So now we're getting into some more advanced stuff with arrays. We learned about what they are, assignment, accessing the dot length property, how to dynamically access all of the items or of the last item in an array. And now we're going to learn about a couple of array methods. And these methods will come in great handy and allow us to add and remove items from the array without using an index. Right? And these are only going to allow us to add and remove items to either the very beginning or the very end of the array. There are methods of adding and removing items in the middle, but they're much more advanced. So today we're only going to learn about how to add and remove items to the very beginning or the very end. First method we're going to learn about is called push. So dot push, and so this is no longer a it's no longer a property, it's a method now. So we're going to have the name of the array, we'll say dot push, and then we'll give it some brackets or some parentheses. In these parentheses, we're going to give it what we want to add to the array. So in this case, we're going to say Jesse. All right. So what push is going to do is it's going to add this new item to the end of the array. Okay? Always to the end. Push always adds to the end. And now we can see that our array is what it normally was before. Dan, Thomas, Jen, Sarah, Raj. And now Jesse's on the end. Awesome. So now we can do this as many times as we want. Right? And we can add as many items to the end of the array that we want. Really cool stuff. So are you seeing now, maybe you're kind of seeing how that dot length minus 1 property might come in? Because now we can do this. Go students dot length minus 1, and it's always going to give us the last item in the array, right? Awesome. Really cool stuff. And we can add as many as we want, and we'll always get the last item using that. Another method is called pop. And pop, we're going to give it parentheses, but we're not going to put anything in those parentheses. We're only going to give it parentheses. And what pop is going to do is it's going to remove the last item from the array. Okay? It'll remove it, and it'll also return it to you. So you can set it to, last item, and then last item will equal whatever it removes. But we'll just know that it removes that item from the array. And there we go. Dan, Thomas, Jen, Sarah. No Raj on there. The last item now equals Raj. So push adds an item to the end, and pop removes an item off the end. Remember, push it on, pop it off, okay? Similarly, we have unshift and shift. And these ones are kind of tricky because they're not as easy to remember as push and pop. But they do the same exact thing just off the beginning. Push and pop, you push it on, you pop it off. Unshift and shift are kind of difficult to understand why they named it that at first. But let's figure it out. Students.unshift is going to add an item to the beginning of the array. There we go. Maria is now at the beginning, at index 0. So now all of these indexes had to get moved over, right? And similarly, shift, just like pop, you don't put anything in the parentheses. You can't put an index. You can't put what item you want removed. It doesn't work. It only removes the first item in the array. And we see that it has now removed Dan from the array, right? Now we just have Thomas, Jen, Sarah, and Raj. So that's push and pop. Remember, push an item onto the back of the array, pop one off the back of it, shift an item onto the, or unshift an item onto the front, shift an item off of it. So shift and unshift, you're probably going to have to look up and play around with quite a bit before you really, really memorize them. But most of the time, we're pushing and popping. Those are the two most popular array methods, are push and pop. But just know that shift and unshift do exist. And also know that these only work for the beginning and the ends of an array. It is possible to remove items and add items to the middle of an array, but it's much more difficult, and those are much more advanced techniques. Cool. So that's arrays for us tonight. I talked about how since the JavaScript is not a strongly typed language, arrays don't have to have a certain type either. We don't have to give a certain length to them. We can add as many items as we want to an array. I think there is a finite number of items. I think it's over 1 million that we're allowed to add to a single array. And for the most part, arrays are going to be data that is related to each other, but not the same. Not the same. It's related to each other, but it's about different different things. Right? Data is related, but not tightly related. That doesn't make sense. Well, you'll see when I'm talking about this now. So the data is related to each other. These are all single students in a class, right? Dan, Thomas, Jen, Sarah, Raj. They're all individual students in the class, okay? The next data structure I'm going to talk about is an object. And when we use the term object in JavaScript, it means this specific data type. We don't use the term objects willy-nilly about any old thing. We're not going to say like add a few objects to that array when we're talking about strings. When we say object, you even see here, it is a real thing. It's an object, okay? Objects are the heart of the JavaScript language. We'll go over it in a little bit, and it might not make a whole lot of sense about why objects are the heart of the JavaScript language, but they are. JavaScript wouldn't be a language without objects. So, unlike an array, which holds data about separate things, objects tend to hold data that is about one thing. Okay, so you wouldn't have 4 different students in a single object. You would have a single object for each student. All right, so it's all data that's related to each other about one thing. And this is not hard, steadfast rules. These are kind of just how convention is. You can have an object with an array, well, let's take a step back. You can have an object with a bunch of different students in it, but that's kind of not how they're used very often. It's usually data about one thing. Let's get into it. New, we gotta spell const right. Now we know that when we create an array, we use the square brackets. When we create an object, we use the curly brackets. This has now created an object. I have created a new object with nothing in it yet. That's how you create an object. All right. Let's go into what an object is. So, unlike arrays that have individual items and they have these indexes for each individual item, objects, we're going to have to create that index ourselves. And we call it a key value pair. Okay, so this index would be the key, and the item would be the value. In an object, we need to create those ourselves, and we do that by giving it the name of the key we want. In this case, I'm going to say key, but I'm going to go back through and delete this, so don't think that you have to call it key. We give it a colon, and we give it the value. Okay. This is the syntax of creating an object. You have the key, colon, and the value. The value is going to be any JavaScript data type. It can be a number, it can be a Boolean, it can be an array. We won't go there right now. It can be another object. It can be any JavaScript data type. The value can. The key, we are not, well, you can wrap it in quotes, but we don't need to right now. We just write the name of the key out, just like we write the name of a variable out, right? You write the name of the key, you give it colon and the value. Now, in objects, we can have as many what we call key value pairs as we want. Just like an array, we can have, almost as many as we want, ever. We can do the same thing in an object. Just like an array, they need to be separated by a comma. Okay, so I'm going to go back through here, and I'm going to change this. I'm going to create this, I'm going to make this object about a single student. All right, so we have an array of students up here, and this one's going to be about a single student. We're going to call this single student, just to make it more clear. This is a single student, and this is going to be their school permanent record. So we're going to have first name, and this is going to be about me. All right, it's going to be Dan. You'll see objects written often like this now, because we have, usually they hold a lot of information, so you're going to see them written on multi-lines like this. You have to always have your comma in there. You are going to run into an issue where you get some unknown error and you don't know what's going on, and I guarantee it's because you forgot a comma. Always. I'm going to guarantee every single one of you is going to run into this. Let's do last name. I'll put my last name. And let's go loves JavaScript. True. And we'll put one more key value pair in here. Favorite number. 42. All right, so this is an object now. This is 4 key value pairs separated by a comma. The key first name corresponds to the value Dan. The key last name corresponds to my last name, Frainer. Key of loves JavaScript corresponds to the Boolean value of true, right? This is a Boolean because there's no quotes around it. And the key of favorite number refers to 42, okay? This is a single object. You can see now how the arrays and objects tend to differ in ideas, right? Where this is, multiple students, this is all about one single student. Key value pairs are important to understand. Key, colon, value with always comma separated. They always have to be comma separated, and there always has to be an opening and a closing bracket, because you will have an issue in the future, I guarantee it, where you forgot to put a closing bracket. It happens to everyone. Cool. So now we have an object. We can pass it around just like we did our array. See, we have our object there now. And also, just like an array, we can access the values. It's a little bit different. We can access the values using the square bracket notation still. But if we do the square bracket notation, we have to use a string of whatever the value is. So if it's first name, we'll do a string of first name. There comes the end. We can't do this because it doesn't know what first name is. It's looking for a variable called first name. This is not very often that we use what we call bracket notation in accessing values on an object, because we have to use the quotes. One reason we would use bracket notation is if we had a variable. So we say let key equal first name, and then I can just say key. There we go. Right? We don't use it very often. Just know that it exists, and if you ever need to use a variable to access an item in an object, you have to use bracket notation. Okay? Understand that. Only use brackets when you need a variable, when you're using a variable. Otherwise, we use dot notation. So just like of any property, and you'll find out in just a little bit why we call it a property. Just like any property, we are going to use dot notation and the name of the property, the name of the key. So you're going to hear key and property interchanged a lot. Okay. There we go. And let's do last name just to show that it's actually working. Right. So we're going to use the name of the object, a dot, and the name of the key without quotes around it. This is called dot notation. As you might imagine, the same way we can assign items in an array, we can also assign key value pairs in an object. So we'll say, I'm going to change my name to Smith. Oh, single student. So now I've used the assignment operator, the single equal sign is always an assignment. It's always going to change something. Just know that. And now we can see that we've changed the last name to Smith on here. So just like with arrays, we can access and assign key value pairs. All right, always using the key. All right. One thing I'll talk about that we don't really use a whole lot is removing a key value pair from something. So what if we wanted to remove favorite number? We're like, oh, we don't need to worry about having a favorite number anymore on here. So we can use the delete, the name of the object, and the dot. And it will remove the whole key value pair from the object. And we'll see that no longer has a favorite number on there. Like I said, it's pretty rare that we would use the delete. Oftentimes you'll see developers simply reassign this to undefined instead of using delete, because it's pretty much the same thing, even though right here you still have it there. But I do want to show you that you can remove key value pairs from objects. Once again, let's go through it. Oh, I didn't talk about adding properties to objects. Talked about deleting them. All right, that's how you access. We're going to use dot notation and then the name of the key or property. How you assign new values is the assignment operator and the new value to the, you can't change, well, you can't change the name of the key, essentially. You can remove it and then put a new key and a new value on there, but you can't change the name of the key, okay? You can change the value. So now, what's a good idea to bring up is, what if I wanted to add some information to this object? We can use the dot notation, and we can just give it a new key. We'll say loves HTML, and I want to say true. So let's look at this now. There is no loves HTML key value pair on here right now. But now there is. Because all you need to do to add a key value pair is use the dot notation, give the key a name, and equal it to whatever value you want to equal it to. All right. The same holds true for bracket notation. Only if I use a string for the key value pair name, the key name. And now we can add items, key value pairs to our objects whenever we want. We can now assign, access, add, and remove values to our objects. Really cool. So we've learned about arrays and about objects. All right, let's keep on the object train. Like I said, objects are the most important item in JavaScript. Okay, they are by far the most important item in JavaScript. So remember when I said that objects values can be anything? right? I was like, all right, friends could be an array of all the friends. Right? So we can have arrays as values. We can have other objects as values. Let's see what an object would be on this. Would be rates. Etc. Right? We can have objects as values on objects. They're really cool. Just like we can have any value on an object, any JavaScript data type we can have on an object. Numbers, strings, booleans, arrays, other objects. We can also have functions on objects. Okay. We can have a function on an object. And when you have a function on an object, it's called a method. All right, so functions on objects are called methods. Non-functions on objects are called properties. Okay, so this is a property and this is a method. And we can just say return hi. Oh, it says name. No, we're going to say says hi right now. All right, this is a lot to take in right now. But just know that we can have any JavaScript data type as a value on an object, including functions. When we have a function, we call it a method. We've used other methods, right? We used students.pop. This is a method on an array. This is a method just on our object here. And we can use the method the same exact way we used it on that array. We're going to give it the name, dot, the name of the method, right? That's how we access. Remember, if this was last name, that's how we access what the value is there, right? We got that. We access the value, and then we call that function. That's how we call a function, right? So just imagine that this gets replaced with this, and then we call the function. And there we go. Hi. Right? It just went and accessed that key value, and then it ran that function. That is called a method. We're going to explore methods a lot more later on, but want to introduce you to the concept of methods. So properties are key value pairs that are static. You know, we have a string of Dan. Methods are a value that is a function. Okay, a couple more things about objects. I'm trying to figure out which order I should present these in. I'm going to present this one first just because we're on the topic of methods, and then I'll go into our other thing. So a very advanced topic when referring to objects and methods is the concept of a keyword called this. This is a very powerful keyword. It is a self-referential keyword used in objects and used in methods specifically. This, when used in a method, refers to, let's just do this. Let's console log. refers to that object itself. Refers to this whole object. All right. So I'm going to call this. It's going to console log this. And look at that. It console logged that whole object. All right. So we can now use this keyword to get access to the values in here. So if I said this dot first name, there we go. Console logged it. If I said this dot last name. So this allows us to access the object that it's being called in, is being used in. Like I said, it's a very difficult concept to really grasp. It might seem pretty simple right now, but as we get into other more advanced JavaScript topics, it can get very wild. But right now, just know that it's a self-referential keyword, that it's in each object. When it's used inside of an object, it refers to that specific object. Okay. I'm going to remove, well, let's do this. Return. I'm hoping that you've all seen string templating syntax, where we can just put a string in. We can put a variable in a string. And look at that. Hi, my name is Dan now. It's because we're using this dot first name. Okay. Just know that it's self-referencing, and it refers to that specific object. All right, we've gone over a ton of new stuff tonight, and a lot of maybe confusing stuff tonight. That's what our awesome exercises are for, and that's what our PM Q&A sessions and our small group sessions in an hour are for. I want to go over one more thing, and this one's going to be a lot lighter in nature, I hope, and that is we have the ability to loop over, to use a loop in. Talked about loops yet? No. We're going to talk about loops. I'm not sure if we've talked about loops yet, but the ability to loop over an object. Okay, it's using the for keyword. Wait, let's see. Oh yeah, we've done loops. Okay, great. So I want to talk about loops real quick on arrays first. I realized I skipped over that. So we know how to write a for loop. Remember, a for loop takes 3. Arguments in it. Okay. And it allows us to run a loop, run a series of code as many times as we allow it to, right? So we can console log I. And we should get 0 through 9. There we go. It ran that 9 times. So in coming back to arrays, if we think about what this array is, it's a series of items, and they all have indexed order to them. So what if we wanted to print off every single one of these items in an array individually? Well, using a for loop would be the best way to do that. So let's go. Let's see, we have up to 4. Oh, we got up to 5. We have 5 items, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we can use our bracket syntax to print them off, right? So let's think about it. The first time this loop runs, I is going to be equal to 0. Students at the index of 0, that's Dan. Then I is going to be plus 1. It's going to be 1. Thomas, Jen, Sarah, etc. Going all the way up, we have 5 students in here. So we're just going to put less than 5. And we got them all. Oh, we got less than 4. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. I popped one. All right, sorry about that. Okay, there we go. Dan, Thomas, Jen, Sarah, Raj. We have all of our students in there. All right. But what if we add 1? All right. We're not going to get that last one in there. Well, we learned about the length property and the ability to that it will always have the number of students or number of items in the array. So we can just use that. And just say dot length. If it's less than the student's dot length, then we want it always to be less than, because once it gets to the length of the students, that's 1 too many. We know that. And then it'll allow us to go over our array and list as many or as little few students as our array has. And that allows us to loop over an array. We can also loop over an array and assign. We can do anything we want with that array and that loop. In the same vein that we have a for loop for arrays and for everything else, objects are actually a little bit different. Objects have what's known as a for in loop. So it's just like a regular for loop. It looks just like a regular for loop, except we only have one statement. So we're going to say for, we're going to give a variable name to our keys. We're going to say in, and we're going to say the name of the object. Okay. So it is going to automatically loop through this object for us. A for in loop will. This is only to be used on objects, not arrays. Don't use this on arrays, only use this on objects. And it will loop through each time, giving us the key. Okay. So let's go console. And look at that. We now have each key, first name, last name, loves JavaScript, says hi is the name of the key. I want to get rid of says hi just for a moment, just so that we aren't tripped up on that. So think for a second, if you have the key, how do you access the value? Just think of how you would do that. Well, we can just use the I want to make sure that we understand why we're going to use this. We can use the bracket notation. And remember, I said only use the bracket notation if you have a variable. And we don't know what key is going to equal. So it is a variable. And so now we can use bracket notation to grab each of the values. So we'll use the name of the object and the key it was given. So we don't even have to, we might not even know what that object is, right? We might not know what key value pairs are on that object, and we can find out this way. There we go. First name, Dan. Last name, Frainer. Loves JavaScript, true. If I were to do this, it would be looking for the key on that object, and there is no key of key, right? So I have to use bracket notation here because it's variable. All right. So those are our two types of loops. Remember, use a regular for loop for common regular for loop for arrays, and use a for in loop for objects, where the variable is the name of the key. All right, we have gone over a lot. We've talked about arrays and objects, which are probably the two data types that you're going to be working with most. In the lesson, we learned what objects are and the many ways to access their properties or their keys, to assign and call methods, to assign values. You may have noticed, you may have seen some patterns with objects. Like I said, objects are the most important data type in JavaScript. Many of these keys and properties and methods, etc., look really familiar, as if we had already used them in virtually every aspect of our learning so far. There is a pattern, and that's because everything in JavaScript is an object. I don't want you to dwell on this too much, but I want you to understand that arrays are just objects with numerical keys. Strings are objects under the hood with built-in methods. Functions are actually objects, etc. Everything in JavaScript is an object. The entire JavaScript runtime is an object. Just understand that that's true. Don't dwell on that too much. Don't worry about that too much. But just start to look for those little patterns as you're learning. And maybe understanding how to call a property on the length property on a string will help you better understand how to call a property on an object itself, or how to call the method, the pop method on an array might give you a better understanding of how to call a method on an object. Just look for these patterns and try to learn from these patterns, and you'll soon come to find out, once you become much more advanced in JavaScript, that these patterns are everywhere. And the more that you understand these patterns, the better that you're going to understand the language as a whole. But for now, just know that that exists. Know that that's real. Everything in JavaScript is an object. Awesome. Let me see. I'm going to bring it off, and I'm going to answer some questions. There we go. Hey, Q&A. Well, I have a few today. All right. If anyone does have any questions, throw them in the Q&A. Any new questions? Otherwise, we'll get on to our assignments, and then we'll come back for our PM small groups. Give you 1 minute. There will be pieces of it in the homework, but all of this is also covered on Training Kit as well. So Alec asked if all this is on the homework. We got another chat going on. All right, what does the $ mean? So that is string template literal. That means that you can have a string and you can create another string using that string. So let's say another. Oh, you have to use backticks. You should have already found out about this, but if not, here it is. If you use backticks, you can then use this little number sign, curly braces, and put that other string in there. And then we can go.
Dan, you're not sharing your screen.
And now you have two strings. Otherwise, if you don't want to worry about that, very simple. you can just use the plus. This is kind of the ES5 way of doing things, is the plus. That other is the, oh, sorry. I've just been talking to the screen. All right, you should see it now. All right. So you can use the old school way of doing it, which is just the plus sign. So you can have a string, and you can make one string out of another two strings, right? Or you can use the backticks and the $, curly brace. This is not an object. I wanted to make that clear. This is a string template literal. All right. Sorry about that. I was talking to my screen and you weren't seeing anything. Cool. Kara asks, is this the equivalent of dictionaries in Python? Objects, yes, the equivalent. It is, but a little bit different. So it's the equivalent of dictionaries in any other object-oriented language. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Go on and work on the assignment, and then come on back and we'll get into our small groups tonight, and you can ask as many questions there as you want. This is difficult stuff. Keep that in mind. It's difficult. You're not going to get all of this first shot, right? You have to keep doing these exercises and keep working with this stuff in order to start finally understanding it. You're going to run into a lot of difficulty and frustration, but you got to keep working on it. It's really awesome once you get it. And this is like the core of the language here. Once you understand objects, you're going to understand so many of our things so much better. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a good night, and we'll see you back here in a little bit.